inte hur många gånger. Det är klart att det ska börja. Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to the premises of the European Commission here in Stockholm. Welcome to all of you who are attending this seminar from here, and also to you who are following it online. And of course, a special welcome. I will soon invite you up to the stage to our distinguished guests, Commissioner Reynders, Commissioner for Justice, and Mr. Hans Dahlgren, the Swedish Minister for EU Affairs. This week, on the 9th of May, Europe was celebrating peace and unity. This day is, of course, the historic anniversary of Schumann's declaration, when he noted that with a new type of political cooperation in Europe, war would become unthinkable in the future. The Russian invasion in Ukraine on the 24th of February this year, unfortunately, obviously casts shadow over this ambition. But we should not forget the many years of peace and prosperity which is still present within the EU member states today. 75 years into this cooperation, we have in many ways accomplished an impressively stable and long-standing European collaboration, not least in the economic field, but also in fields that are very close to the nation states. But to be able to cooperate this closely, it's important to share some fundamental values and democratic principles. One of the most fundamental is expressed in Article 2 of the Treaty on the European Union. You see it here behind me in Swedish, but I will read out a very short summary of this article for those of you who don't follow Swedish or can't see it. The European Union is founded on the values of respect for human rights, human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, and respect for human rights, including the rights of persons belonging to minorities. So when the latest consolidated treaty was negotiated and agreed upon between the EU member states in 2009, all member states agreed on every word expressed in this treaty, and also the national parliaments agreed to the treaty expressions. So to be able to understand the rule of law discussions today, that we will talk more about today, we also need to understand another important legal principle, which is the principle of primacy. This principle obliges the member states to actually amend their national laws so that they conform with European legislation. This obviously also includes European values and everything that we have agreed upon in the treaties. And also notably, this principle is not often a very big problem for the member states. In the opposite, it's actually seen as an important driving force for European integration in many areas. But in the rule of crisis, it's appeared to be a little bit more problematic, because some member states argue that this doesn't apply within certain national sovereign areas. So in recent years, the Court of Justice, the European Court of Justice, has been called upon to interpret Article 2 in view of the development in particularly Hungary and Poland. And the Court has established that compliance with this article is, and I read now from what they've said, is a condition for the enjoyment of all the EU rights deriving from the application of the treaties to the member states. And it also expressed that the European Union must do all it can within its competence to enforce these values. So we will soon also discuss more about what is the content of these values, but first of all I would like to invite our guests to share their initial thoughts, and we will start by Commissioner Reynders. So please have the stage.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much again for this invitation to discuss once more about the rule of law, and I want to thank the Minister for European Affairs and Dahlgren, the hands to be with us today, because we have had so many exchanges on the rule of law in different occasions, and we'll have again during the Swedish presidency next year, but also before that. Now, I want to just introduce, and because we will have an exchange maybe with you, to say that first of all, during many years we have paid attention to the budgetary situation in the member states and the structural reforms, pension schemes, education, flex security in many member states due to the evolution in some, and maybe not with the same attention to the values. If you look to the discussions in the past, and after the financial crisis, it was possible to enhance the discussion on budgetary situation with the open semester and a lot of kind of other mechanisms. And it was maybe due to the fact that we have had the consideration that it was granted to be aligned on the values where you are a member of the European Union. And so it seems to be that in many years we have said if you are a member now, you are in line with the requirements of the treaty and certainly the Article 2. And unfortunately, we have seen in the last year, it's not the case. It's possible to have some backsliding. And so I don't want to explain the process, but since some years we have tried to build new tools to discuss on the rule of law. And I will insist on the first one. It's maybe the most efficient, if there is a correct reaction of the member states, is the rule of law report. We have introduced such a new mechanism, a cycle, every year with a rule of law report. We will publish the third edition already this year in July with recommendations for the first time. And we pay attention to different aspects of the rule of law in the 27 member states on an equal footing. the independence of the justice system, the fight against corruption, media pluralism, media freedom, and the checks and balances in the constitutional order, but I mean the role for the lawyers and the bar associations, but the role for the civil society organizations, the civic space, and so on. And so we come with that. And I will say, since 2020, the first edition, we have had a good success with a very large majority of member states, because we have seen a positive reaction to try to improve the situation and to answer to all concern and all remarks. We have seen also a positive evolution with more and more discussions, certainly in the Commission, because it's the own assessment of the Commission, the report, but also in the Council. We have seen in the General Council more and more discussions now, in general on the report, but also on 5 member states during each and every presidency. And during the Swedish presidency next year, we'll conclude the first tour, the first round, on the 27 member states. So it's an ongoing process, and I've seen that discussion after discussion, there is a greater involvement of the different ministers in charge about the rule of law, because they know that they will have to explain the situation and to answer to many questions, so it's become to be normal to discuss. And I remember 5, 10 years ago, it was totally abnormal to discuss on the rule of law and the values in the Council. We try to do the same in the Justice Council, about specific issues like the independence of the prosecutor office, or the appointment and the discipline of the judge, and so on. And we'll maybe continue with other kind of formation of the Council. We have discussions in the European Parliament, and we try to organize a discussion at the national level, like in such a visit here in Stockholm, and make a tour of the capitals with the rule of law report. And we ask to different organizations to organize permanent debate during the whole year in all the member states about the rule of law report. And so I said there are many positive effects of the rule of law report, and the goal that we have is in fact to install a culture of the rule of law in the entire European Union. And again, we have a lot of progress again in front of us, and I'm thinking about the way to discuss not only with the friends of the rule of law or the students in international affairs or European project, but more to go to all the citizens. It's not easy. And one of the difficult issues that we have in many member states is to show that the rule of law is important for the daily life of the citizens. And it's not just an abstract concept for some specialists. Just to explain that if you don't have an independent and an impartial judge, you don't have any chance to protect your rights against the authorities, but against what kind of other problems. But of course, in some specific situation, we have a more systemic or systematic issue in different member states. And there, we need to react with other tools than the rule of law report. When we are looking to the evolution of the justice system in Poland, we have seen reforms against maybe the independence of the justice system. And so, on such a kind of situation, we have had to introduce infringement proceedings before the Court of Justice. So the first choice for the Commission is to go to the Court of Justice and to receive a decision of the Court, a binding one, and we have had, to give such an example, the same in Hungary about the funding of NGOs, academic freedom, or the migration and the asylum seekers. We have had very positive decisions. And more and more, we are going to the court, and we are asking also to the court to do more. We have received about the justice system in Poland interim measures to try to solve the issue without any implementation by the Polish authorities. So we have asked a fine, and now we have a fine of €1 million per day. And till now, it's the decision of October, it's a total amount of more than 160 million. And if they don't want to pay, we organize a setting off. And so we have organized a setting off, and we have a real contribution from the budget to pay such a kind of fine. That's the first way, to go to the court and to receive a decision of the court. The other way that we have is to go to the Council, in fact. The Commission has the possibility to organize the process, the Parliament too, about the so-called Article 7, a procedure to challenge the situation on the rule of law. Following the treaties, you don't have the text here, but on the Article 7, we have different majority to reach to do something. So just to say that there is a risk of a breach of the rule of law, we need to reach the 4/5 in the Council, and to impose a sanction, we need unanimity except the concerned member state. It's a suspension of the voting rights. But for the moment, we have these long discussions for Poland since 2017 on the request of the Commission, for Hungary since 2018 on the request of the Parliament, but presidency after presidency we discuss and we put a political pressure on the discussions. Since the 1st of January last year, we have a new tool, the conditionality mechanism, the way to ask to the Council to suspend or to stop some funding of different policies to one member state if we are sure at the Commission level that there is a link between some breaches to the rule of law and the financial interest of the Union. And you have seen maybe that we have started last month a formal procedure about Hungary again in such a mechanism, and maybe at the end we will take the decision, we'll see, to go to the Council. And there we need a robust file. It's what we try to build, like for the court, but we need also the support of the member states. And there again, I want to say that it's not just a discussion in the bubble like we have seen sometimes in Brussels, and the Parliament, the Council, and the Commission, but it will be more and more a discussion at the national level, again, because the decision will be taken by the representative of the different governments around the table in the Council, and we need a qualified majority there. And so there is a real task for the national parliament to discuss on the rule of law in the member states, to discuss on the rule of law in a specific situation like we'll have to do in Hungary, and then to push pressure on the government to take a decision. And we will see. It will be a challenge. But I'm saying that because I'm sure that we have all the tools in our hands to protect and to promote the rule of law. And I want to conclude to say, before to answer to your question after to listen to Hans, for the moment there are some discussions, maybe in the same member states, about the fact that is it needed to do so many different things about the rule of law now that we have a war, that we have an aggression of Russia in Ukraine. It's true that since the 24th February we are in another reality. But I will say a fortiori, we are asking to Russia to apply international rules, territorial integrity of a neighbor country, sovereignty of a neighbor country. They don't do that, so we decide on sanctions. If we want to be credible on such a way to try to organize a rule-based order at the international level, we need to be credible at home. We need to show that we are doing the job at home. And that's a first conclusion. For the moment, also with such a situation, it's very important to continue to work day after day on the rule of law. And I will just add that it will be the same in the future when we will discuss about the relations between the European Union and some candidate countries. In the Balkans, in Georgia, in Moldova, also in Ukraine. We will have to pay attention to the rule of law in all the negotiations. It must be the starting point, but it must be also the end of the negotiations to be sure that the new member is fulfilling all the requirements of the rule of law. Not only that, there are other criteria, but that will be very important. And I want to insist on this because it's the duty of the EU to try to explain all the time that we are a union organized on some values. We start from the values, and we need to be very strict on this. So, again, thanks for your attention today and this opportunity to explain to you what we are doing for that, but of course, it will be a pleasure to engage in a discussion with you after maybe some remarks from Dahlgren on the same subject.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Reynders. And please stay on stage, and we will invite Minister Dahlgren to share his initial views. Please.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Didier, for coming to Stockholm. It's very useful for us to have this ongoing dialogue with you and your collaborators, especially preparing for what's going to happen here next year when we take over the presidency in Sweden. And as you said, the issues that we discussed here, they are about values. We can see them listed here in the Swedish language. These values enshrined really in the treaties about not just respect for the rule of law, but everything from equality to the human rights to justice, solidarity, equality between men and women, etc., etc. I think if you look at the European Union, this is what kind of binds us all together in the European project. And it's clear that I think these values are the primary strength of our cooperation. And what makes it also a rather unique political union, maybe the strongest one that world history has ever seen, in my view. And these legally binding commitments to a set of fundamental values, I think, is really crucial to have a functioning society. We all agreed, all the 27 of us, member states, when we entered this union, that we were going to respect these values and we were going to uphold them. Because they are not exclusively European values, but they are the values of the European Union. And they form the basis for the entire Union. And that is, of course, also why it is so alarming when these values are being questioned, when their promises are broken by governments that already are in the EU. On the other hand, I think there is cause for some optimism because we actually do have the institutions that can uphold these values, upholding the rule of law. And that's why I think the work that has been done by the Commission as the guardian of the treaties is particularly important. I'm so happy to see the work that you have done, Didier, and your colleagues in the College of Commissioners, that you are taking action really in dealing with the challenges to the rule of law. And from a Swedish perspective, I have to say that we are really pleased with the way that you're tackling this issue, and also, of course, by how clear the Court of Justice has been in many of the decisions it has taken. I also want to emphasize the role that has to be played by us in the member states when it comes to upholding the rule of law in our union. We may be quick also here in Sweden to look at other countries and see the shortcomings there and to point out what's going wrong, to criticize the developments that we do not like. And that's, of course, fine to do, but I think it's equally important that we look at what we can do in our own countries, in each of the 27 ones. We get our own house in order, as they say. We have here in Sweden initiated I would say, a reform process to try to further strengthen our judicial independence. We have a cross-party committee that is chaired by the President of the Supreme Court. I think you have met him already. You know, this may not be such a hot topic in the election campaign that we have just started, but they are important issues for our democracy. And the committee that I mentioned, they are supposed to examine our framework for judicial independence. They are to propose both legislative and constitutional amendments, if necessary. And I hope that this rather inclusive framework that we have, with all political parties involved, will also present a successful recipe. There are also other things to be done. As you said, the annual report on this situation for the rule of law in all member states is an important vehicle for all of us in our discussions with other member states. And some of the processes that you described, including the new mechanism of conditionality that we have since the 1st of January last year, it may very well be a very central issue during next year's first half, when we will have the presidency of the Union. And this is something that could be challenging, that could be difficult, but what is difficult can also be very important. And I look forward to whoever is going to be chairing the General Affairs Council from Sweden that semester to show great courage in moving the process forward. Thank you.
Thank you both for these initial remarks. And I know it's important to both of you to actually engage in a discussion on the rule of law with the citizens. And as you are here and also following us online, I would like to also tell you that it's very possible now to start thinking about the questions. And while you do this, I would like to ask the two of you, but I will start with Commissioner Reynders. You mentioned these new tools. Some of them are not tools because infringement procedures, for example, has been in the treaty for many years. But you mentioned the rule of law reports and also the conditionality regulation. I know you've had this question before, but I will ask you again. Do you have trust in these mechanisms to actually solve these problems that we see in certain member states?
First of all, I have full trust in the way to improve the situation in the EU through such a kind of mechanism, certainly through the report. And I said this year we will come with recommendations, and I've seen since 2 years a real evolution with a positive approach in many member states to try to engage reforms and all the time to make progress. I will say the main principle that we have is a non-regression principle. So we want not to be perfect, nobody's perfect, but we don't want to have exactly the same system in all the member states. We ask just if you engage some reforms, please try to improve the situation and to go more and more in the way to apply the European standards and to have full respect for the European values. Where I'm maybe more prudent about the trust is in the fact that if we have some member states engaging reforms with a backsliding and with a regression, in fact, we have to react with, of course, a full trust in the Court of Justice. I've seen that in the last months and years. We have a real positive reaction. But we need also to have a full trust in the member states. And when I'm speaking about the member states, it's not only to speak about the governments and the parliaments, also to speak about the citizens. And it's the reason why one part of my trust in the way to react also in more difficult situations is the discussions that we try to engage with all the citizens in all the member states about the rule of law and to try to install a culture of the rule of law. And I will say the most difficult part of this is to convince the citizens that it's important for their daily life. Just to give an example, when I discuss about the disciplinary regime of the judges in Poland, there are many citizens thinking that it's a problem for the judge. So I need to explain or not. It's also important for you to have an independent and impartial judge. When we discuss about abortion, or when we discuss about the LGBTIQ community, there is immediate emotional reaction of many citizens and many civil society organizations. We have sometimes less competence at the EU level to work on it. But that proves that if it's possible to explain that there's an influence on your daily life, it's become to be more and more efficient in the way to react. And again, when we have a systemic issue, it will be that. It will be the pressure coming from all the member states and not only the European institutions, but both, and also coming from the citizens that it will be important to react. So I have full trust when we have a normal relation with the member states. When there is a more systemic problem, we have, again, to build more and more a real process with the member states and with the citizens. I know that we have also with Sweden on board the so-called group of friends of the rule of law, but it's not enough. We need maybe to convince more and more member states to pay attention to that. But there's a progress, and the rule of law reports is very positive in such a way to convince more and more member states that we need to work together to protect the values.
Thank you. And Minister Dahlgren, do you have trust in the rule of law mechanisms that are in place today?
Well, the issue of trust is key here because that's the whole argument, I think, between insisting on each individual member state respecting the independence of the judiciary, etc. Because if you don't have such an independence, if you have systematic breaches, you will hurt the trust that is necessary for the cooperation, the entire cooperation within the Union. Take just the business case. Businesses and companies in Europe who want to make contracts and export and import with entities in a country that does not have respect for the independence of the judiciary, they will lose trust. They will not be able to be sure that they will get the payments or that the products will be of the quality that is required by the legal network, etc. So I think the issue of trust is really there, and I agree very much with Didier that we should perhaps in our discussion about rule of law not just talk about what it means for the court, for the judges, but let's also talk about what it means for the business people, for the workers in our industry, for the journalists who really depend on the respect for the freedom of the press, for university lecturers what academic freedom is? I mean, these practitioners should also be here sometime at the table, and maybe we could have that in another discussion next year.
Thank you, and please keep thinking about your questions. You have another 20 minutes to put to these gentlemen. We have a question? What you pointed at me. No, but when we're on this topic of trust, there's also this little complication in the EU treaties talking about the national identity of the member states. Now, would you see a tension between Article 2 and, so to speak, the member states' possibilities to organize their national systems and this principle of national identity? How would you determine the scope of national identity, which we often see that the violating member states now, who have been actually judged by the Court of Justice to violate the European values, but still they argue that there is a scope here.
But in fact, if you look through the treaties and you compare with the national constitutions, we are aligned on the same values. We don't have so many problems with the different national constitutions. It's something else when you discuss about the interpretation of the Constitution by different bodies in different member states. But I want to insist on the fact that what we have in our mind is to ask the full respect of those values, but not to have exactly the same system. Just to give you an example, we will have elections. We have had elections in other member states in the last week. We'll have in the next week. We have 27 different electoral systems. It's sometimes very difficult to explain to the citizen in one member state what the system is in another one. But we are quite sure that we have democratic systems in the 27th. So we don't ask to have the same. We ask just to be aligned with the democratic vision. The same for the judiciary. I went during the day to the Supreme Court, and my first question was, it's possible to organize a constitutional review in Sweden, because there is no constitutional court. And we have only maybe 15 or 115 constitutional courts in Europe. But we don't ask to have one. We ask just to have such a kind of possible review with another method, and we have different methods. And about national identity is the same. So it's possible to be very different in the way to organize the different processes, but in full compliance with some values. And to do that, you have different tools. A preventive one at the international level is the Venice Commission, to give an example, in the Council of Europe, to try to explain if you are aligned with the standards. And then, of course, there are other kind of mechanisms. The Court of Justice, of course, because there is an exclusive competence to give an interpretation to the EU law and to the privacy of the EU law. And so we work all the time on that. But to give you a last very concrete example, you know that in the Council of Europe we have the Istanbul Convention to fight against domestic violence. It's impossible to have a ratification by all the member states. And in some member states, the reaction is to say yes, but we have all national traditions or culture about the gender, maybe. And I've said all the time, maybe the way to discuss about the family law, it's possible. But the violence against women or against children, it's a crime. It's not a question of national culture, of national history, it's a crime. So, because we don't have a ratification, now we have a new instrument we have put on the table, a European instrument to fight against domestic violence. And so that's the difference. It's not to say we ask to have exactly the same approach in all the different questions, but, again, to apply the same values. And of course, we are taking into account the fact that we don't have the same justice system in the Nordic countries, or in the south of Europe, or in the eastern part of Europe, but we try to organize an evolution to fulfill all the requirements of those values. That's the only one way. So, national identity, national culture, of course, but in full compliance with the values.
Well, thank you for that answer. Would you like to share your views on the question?
Well, it's a broad question, but can I just take one example? One overriding issue for us, all of us in Europe, I think, is to make sure that our workers get decent wages. But the way that you do this is certainly different. some countries have minimum wage legislation, but in our national identity in Sweden is that we will obtain our wages through collective bargaining. And the government should be way back from any legislation on wages. And we can, I think, the Council succeeded already in December, find a way that gives the possibility for all kinds of national identity on this issue to be represented. I hope that this compromise in the Council also will hold when it's now negotiated in the European Parliament.
Thank you. So I interpret you that there is absolutely a national identity. There is a scope, a room for that, but it doesn't apply really on Article 2 because this is shared democratic principles. So,
yes, but you need also to know, I know that it's very sensitive, but you haven't saw the way to organize the fight against any discrimination or to protect the fundamental rights. But we have different kind of levels in that. Of course, we have some principles that we want to be applied everywhere. But again, I've mentioned in passant the family law. We have different rules in the different member states about the weddings of couples of the same sex. There are some possibilities or not. Adoption by a couple of the same sex. We have different situations. But we try to ask to all the member states to have full respect for the decision of the others. So, to give an example, we ask to all the member states to agree to give a recognition to a wedding organized in another member state. Also, if it's impossible in their own situation. Before the end of this year, we will come with an initiative on the parenthood. In the same way, is it possible to recognize children coming from maybe a couple of the same sex in another member state? Also, you don't agree on this in your member state. For the moment, we don't have the capacity to do many things because we have the free movement of people, so it's possible to ask at least to give a residence right to the family, but not to have all the civil rights. But we will see if it's possible to make a progress. But on this, it's possible to have different views because it's quite recent. If you look to the last decades, in many member states, we have seen positive, in my mind, evolutions, but very recently. And it's possible to have another approach in another member state. What we have, in contrary to do, is to avoid any discrimination. To give an example again, due to the sexual orientation of the people. And it's the reason why we have decided to move against a new law in Hungary last year, not to protect the children, but we are sure that there's a discrimination for the LGBTIQ. So it's very difficult to balance the situation, but we try to see how it's possible to apply the values, but with a real room for maneuver for the member states due to their national identity, their story, and the way to make an evolution or not in different fields. So that's very important to take care of this.
Thank you. And I think we have a question from the audience.
Yes, hello. Mr. Commissioner, you have already been talking about the fact that there's a process for rule of law issues within the EU, but we have a question online that asks what should the EU do about the rule of law and the fact that it has decreased in terms of quality in the Balkans and in other vulnerable countries such as Moldova. Thank you.
But I said, first of all, if we are doing so much in the EU, it's first of all, of course, to protect the values in the EU, but it's also to be credible when we are going outside the EU. I said it all the time, if you don't do the job at home, it's difficult to take part in many discussions outside Europe. And so now we have started a new strategy on the enlargement before the aggression of Russia in Ukraine. It was a decision long before, to say we'll start with the rule of law, we'll conclude with the rule of law. We want to be sure that to be a member of the EU, it's possible to fulfill all the requirements of the rule of law. But except that, we have a sort of conditionality, and I have had many discussions with the World Bank and the IMF on this in the same way. Is it possible to take into account the reform process not only in the economic field, but also on the rule of law, to try to engage with different partners, not only in Europe, but also on other continents? To give you an example, in the discussion with the African Union, we have tried to discuss again about the full respect for democracy, fundamental rights, and the rule of law. and not to come with some lessons, but to try to share some experience that we have. Because again, in Europe, we have had very difficult situation before. So it's not just to give lessons, it's just to explain the process that we have followed. And so we'll continue to engage on this. And again, if you look at the situation in Ukraine, it's what we are doing. Of course, in an exceptional and very sensitive situation, but when there is a breach to international rules, like the integrity of the territory of Ukraine, we have reacted immediately with sanctions and with reactions. And for the first time since 2 years, I'm sure, we have the possibility to impose sanctions in our foreign policy, not only for specific cases that we have had in Iran or others, but also for violation of human rights. If I may give you an example, with the forced labor in the Xinjiang for the Uyghurs in China, we have decided to impose some sanctions. And of course, we have received also sanctions from China, so for parliament members in the European Parliament. But that proves that we try to engage more and more in the external world with the same approach. And in the trade agreements, we put more and more emphasis on the rule of law, democracy, but certainly environment on one side and human rights on the other side.
Thank you so much. I know that you have engaged in bilateral discussions due to Sweden taking over the presidency in the Council in January 2023. Is it possible, Minister Dahlgren, to share a few thoughts on how you are planning to run these discussions on the rule of law during the Swedish presidency? To give us an idea.
Absolutely. As you know, there's going to be an election in September, and we don't know who's going to be Minister for EU Affairs next year. But I can say a little about what I see from now, from my perspective, and I'm sure that these fundamental issues are uncontroversial in the Swedish Parliament. Whoever is going to be in this particular position will also take on the role of pushing these issues in the United Affairs Council and also. I think we will, of course, have to continue with the Article 7 process, as the Commissioner described in his initial remarks. We will also conclude the peer review process with the two remaining member states on the list of the 27. We may also start, at least discuss how the next round is going to be initiated, and then perhaps also talk with the Spanish presidency that will come after us on how we organize this, and of course with the Commission. But there is also a delicate thing that will probably pop up during our 6 months, and that is the implementation of the mechanism of conditionality. Because this is now something that the Commission has triggered, and it's now in Budapest to formulate their response, which has to be done within 2 months. And then the Commission will evaluate this and will come with a proposal, and the Council will probably start discussing this maybe already this autumn. But I don't think this will come to an end before the 1st of January, and therefore it may very well happen during the first 6 months. And you know, we have legislation that now says that decisions of that kind has to be taken by a qualified majority. That means we cannot just have the usual suspects, the 10 friends of the rule of law to vote in favor. We must have a more sizable majority in order to get the right decision taken. But if we have a robust file from the Commission, I'm sure that we can do our job in the Council.
Thank you very much. There is room for one more question from the audience. Otherwise, I will actually invite you to have some final thoughts on the more general topic of the negative trends in democracy in the world, something which obviously is quite difficult for the Commission to deal with. But do you see, we also talk a lot in the European Union about becoming resilient in all kinds of aspects. Do you see, and I know that there is actually a democracy report from the University of Gothenburg which lists the 50 top countries, democratic countries, and then the 15 bottom ones. And all 27 member states, except for Hungary, are on the top. All the Poland is at the bottom. Hungary is at the top of the bottom list. And what they're measuring is the democratic states, and it's done through a lot of questionnaires talking to civil servants in these member states. So it's a very engaged university group who does this. But also what they're seeing, what they're noticing is that there is a backsliding within these member states, quite extensive backsliding, which we also hear in many reports from the Commission. So now, is there a need to kind of react to these general trends? Is there a need for more cooperation in additional areas, or can we still, through the national level, defend our democratic systems just through talking about it? As we, of course, we're lacking the competence at the European level. Please, some final words from both of you.
But first of all, I want to say that we are looking to the international ranking and so on. But I want to say that, of course, we have quite a very good situation in the EU. Just to give you an example, some time ago I went to a panel in Paris, and I was with the former candidate for the presidential election in Belarus, and with Dr. Mukwege, working in the eastern part of Congo. And she explained the situation in Belarus, and then he explained the situation in the eastern part of Congo, I know very well. The first reaction was maybe too close, but I need to say that we don't have any problem. It's not true. It's not because it's worse elsewhere in the world that we don't have to pay attention to the situation in Europe. That is what I've said about the situation in Ukraine. It's not because we have a war at the border. In contrary, it's due to that we need to pay more attention. That's the first element. Then, I'm sure that we have a lot of things to do if we look to the evolution, certainly in the electoral process in many member states. There's many populist parties, many requests for strong people at the head of different government or different processes. And to do that, we need to try to convince more and more citizens that democracy, rule of law, fundamental rights are the core values, not only in the interest of the Union or the member state, in their own interest, like was said by Hans about the businesses for the function of the internal market. But this morning you were in another meeting with me, academic freedom, like you have said, but many other kind of issues are very important. And that's maybe the most difficult part of the job for the moment to me, but also to the member states and to the politicians everywhere, to try to convince the citizens that what we are discussing now is very important for their daily life, day after day. And that's a debate that you will have in Sweden maybe during the electoral process, because it's a huge moment to do that. But I know that it's difficult to reach all the citizens about such a kind of discussion. So it's very important. And to do that, it's not only to engage a debate like today or others, but also to protect the rules, because if you have real media freedom, it's easier to have an access to the citizen. If you have a real role for the civil society organizations and the civic space, it's easier so to organize such a kind of discussion. So what we are doing about the rule of law, it's so important to try to show to the citizens that it's in their own interest. But I was said to make progress in my last remark is that we need also to come with concrete results. And you know that at the beginning of the creation of the European Community and in the Union, peace was with the NATO, and I know that we have many discussions here about another organization in Brussels, but the NATO and the EU, it was possible to provide peace. We have seen the development of democracy everywhere in Europe, and we are in a better situation now than some decades ago in many member states. We have seen the suppression of the borders, the creation for some member states of the euro, now the vaccine during the pandemic, maybe the defense process due to the security issue in Ukraine, and so on. In the future, we will have to fight against inflation and the evolution that we have followed. If it's possible to come with concrete results, it will be also evident to move. So I want just to say that it's not only rule of law. We need also to continue to work on economic and social issues, because both are very important. But again, to go to the citizens and to go to many different debates about what we are doing for the values, it's very important, because at the end we need to install a culture of the rule of law, and we need to convince the citizens, and not only some intermediary bodies. It's important to have everybody involved, but certainly for the citizens.
Thank you. And to close this panel, I would like also to invite you, Minister Dahlgren, to share your views on this topic.
Yeah, you talked about backsliding, and that's true, of course. I have also spent some time at this institution in Gothenburg that is studying the development, and it's going in a better direction. We are back to pre-1989, as far as those studies have shown. And this is important to us, all of us in the European Union. And as you mentioned, we have a discussion here in Sweden right now whether Sweden should join a military alliance or not. This is a debate about our security. In my view, this is also about security. To make sure that we have democratic societies in as many countries as possible, that the values that we all endorse here, our European values, are also the values of other nations. That is also something that will provide for less conflict and more cooperation in the future, and that's also beneficial for our security. Thank you.
Thank you very much for attending this panel and for sharing all your perspectives. And we who are assembled here today, we have to keep doing what they actually request us to do, to keep thinking about the rule of law, its meaning in our national systems. Thank you all for attending, both you who are here physically and you online. And with these remarks, a warm applause to our guests.
Thank you.